You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
Let's play a little game of Would You Rather, School Counselor Edition. Okay, would you rather spend your weekend planning a group or spend your afternoon sitting in irrelevant PD? Yikes. Or would you rather be the only counselor with no one to collaborate with, or to spend hours searching online for engaging activities? All of these options are pretty bad, right? But unfortunately, they're all too real. But what if I told you I had a solution for you? What if I told you I had access to hundreds of school counseling lessons, groups, and activities, counselor-specific trainings on the topics you need most, and a community of like-minded school counselors to support you? You would say, yes, please. Well, that is what Impact is all about. Impact is my monthly membership for school counselors, and it helps you with all of these things. You get access to hundreds of resources. That's unlimited free downloads. Log in and get what you need right away to every single resource that's in my store. We add new resources each and every month. We're adding a new middle school and elementary resource each month, and some of these are bonus Impact exclusives, meaning that you can get resources just for members. You can request resources that you need and easily search so you can find exactly what you're looking for. And let's talk about the trainings, counselor-specific trainings on the topics you need most. We do these each and every month as part of our Coffee with the Counselor series. Impact members get to join for absolutely free. You earn PD certificates and you get exclusive access to members-only things like the Ultimate Small Group Experience and our Summer Summit Conference. And the community. Y'all, this is possibly my favorite part of Impact. I so look forward to jumping on these calls, to getting to know counselors who are similar to me and also completely different. It's so fun to hear from your experiences and your challenges, and everyone brings a unique perspective to the table. We have an exclusive online community, and we even have a cool app where you can chat with other counselors in these community circles. We have our monthly calls, like I mentioned, twice a month, and we share wins, troubleshoot tough cases, and just talk about what it's like to be a counselor, because so often we're on our own island at our school sites. So if any of that sounds like it's for you, I would love to see you inside Impact. Go to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact to solve all of your counselor problems. And I have a special offer for my listeners. Use code POD at checkout to save 10% off your first month. Okay, let's go to today's episode. Hey there, I'm back with your last episode of 2024. Wow, you are listening to the last episode of 2024 for School Counseling Simplified. Thank you for being here. I hope you've had a beautiful year. Cheers to a new year. Let's wrap it up. This is one of our best of, most downloaded episodes. I want to share with you, this is episode 129, Supporting Title I Students and Families with Megan Polk. Okay, let's check it out. Do you ever wish someone would tell you what you're supposed to be doing, when you're supposed to be doing it, and how you're supposed to be doing it? Well, I've got you covered with school counseling lesson plans for the entire school year. And the best part, they're absolutely free. Go to bit.ly/counseling lesson plans to download yours today. I hope you find these super helpful and you're going to have your best year yet. On today's episode, I do an interview with one of my dear friends, Megan Polk from the Literacy Dive. Megan is a literacy specialist, and she's been on the podcast before, actually, to talk to us all about using journaling with our students, and she was one of our Summer Summit presenters last year. But today we're talking about something totally different. We're talking about her experience working in Title I schools, and we talk specifically the role of school counselors and how they can help support Title I families and students. I think you're going to love this episode. I found it super inspiring and with a lot of tangible takeaways. Okay, let's check it out. Hey, Megan, how are you today?
I am doing great. How are you, Rachel?
So good. I'm so glad to have you back on the podcast. So I think it's been since last summer you were on talking about journaling with us.
Yes, I was going to say time flies. I do remember recording that with you and your amazing audience. And I'm like, here we are again. I'm so pumped to be able to talk with you today.
Yes. So I'll link to that one in the show notes. It was a great episode. But today we're taking a different direction. So instead of talking, so you're like the literacy queen, and I'll have you introduce yourself to everybody. But instead of talking literacy today or journaling, things like that, we're going to talk about actually supporting students and families in Title I schools. So tell us a little bit about who you are and your background.
Sure. So my name is Megan Polk, and I am currently living in Nashville, Tennessee. I have taught all ranges of elementary from kindergarten. I moved up to second grade. I moved to fourth grade. And then I got the amazing opportunity to become an interventionist where I got to work with kindergarten all the way through fifth grade. So I often say the best of all the worlds. And just to support them with reading and writing. And then I also got trained with working with students with dyslexia. So it has just been so much fun working with those students within the Title I community. And I personally focus on reading and writing strategies and skills, although it's a little fun fact that my favorite subject is actually math.
I knew
and
that.
it blows everyone away. But I really just saw a lot of gaps within literacy with the students that I had to serve. And so that is kind of how I took on that feat of just becoming as strong as I could in literacy and closing those gaps. And so I'm also the host of the Literacy Dive podcast. I create resources underneath the Literacy Dive. I have a membership, The Writing Made Simple, and I'm just so happy to be able to connect with you and chat with your listeners today.
Yes, yes. Love all of that. That's so funny about math. I don't think I knew that about you.
Yeah, many people don't, but I've always loved math growing up. That was like my subject as a student and even when I first started teaching, but because I've taught all subjects, I've always done self-contained.
Mhm.
I never did like the departmentalized that a lot of teachers are doing now. So yeah, little fun fact.
That's awesome. So tell us, let's just kind of jump right in. What is your experience working at Title I schools? I know a lot of our counselors are working at these types of schools. Some are not, but everyone, you never know. You may be in the future, or any of these strategies can just be helpful. So yeah, just kind of fill us in on your experience there.
Sure. Well, I will say that when I first got into the schools and they said Title I, I honestly did not know what that even was. And so if there is anyone who is like, what is Title I? That is just it's a name underneath the federal umbrella where it basically aids high poverty schools in providing supplemental services and just any types of supports to those low achieving families and the students within those schools. And I know that typically these laws are constantly changing and it might change from even location or state. Not the main components of it because it's all federal funding, but it might change location to location with the way time is. But I know that when I first got into these schools teaching and had to kind of get the understanding, it was always the schools that make up at least 40% of enrollment that are low income. And that would be measured mainly if the kids were on free and reduced lunch. And so that then a school would be eligible to get Title I funding, and they would be able to use those funds to operate school-wide or also something that's targeted. So I've actually been in both schools, some that are school-wide in terms of receiving funding, and then also some that were just targeted, which those will identify students that are at risk, and those students will possibly not meet the state's requirements for the content standards and performance standards. So they would be able to receive individualized instructional programs, whether it's tutoring, whether it's in the school, outside of the school, that would be covered for them specifically to help to close those gaps. School-wide would be something like the different types of tutorials, targeted help, whether it's before or after school, during school, whether teachers were doing it or outside professionals were doing it. But also with school-wide, they would provide funding for programs, whether it's in the school or outside of the school, any types of opportunities that those students would traditionally not have access to because of the at-risk situations, field trips, things like that. So I've been in both models of those schools where we would have school-wide pushes, as well as just having the ones where there were certain students that were receiving targeted assistance. And I will say that in each of those schools that I was in, it's not necessarily that the rules would change underneath the umbrella, but it really was the heart of the educators, the heart of the administration, and everyone genuinely working together in order to provide the school to be a safe place for those students, as well as being able to do whatever had to be done to be able to support those families, because that is where the students would go home to. So the biggest difference was the reaction and the action that teachers would take in order to make that a conducive learning environment.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for giving such like a concise yet thorough definition. That was amazing. And
I was going to say it's very thorough. So definitely do your research, but that's just in like, little simple terms.
That was great. No, thank you. Good refresher for everybody. I've worked at a school-wide one, but I'm honestly was not aware of the targeted interventions. I have not had experience in that area. So that's awesome as well.
Yeah, I think they were, now again, this was when I was in Georgia. This was when I was in Georgia. Right out of college. So like 2007, 2008, 2009, I was there through 2012. And so one of the schools I was in, they had called it targeted assistance. Mm-hmm. And so that is just when there are certain students that maybe the whole school doesn't, the whole school might not qualify, but there are a certain percentage of those students that do. And so they are able to get that targeted intervention, which I just thought was phenomenal.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that that exists. That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you again for sharing that. And I want to touch more on what you were saying about the reaction and the action of like faculty and staff when it comes to working with this student population. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. So with the reaction, it's just basically that's going to be more of like our internal feelings about it. We already know that teaching is tough. It's difficult, even way prior to the pandemic. There's just so many challenges with receiving your roster and knowing that you have a wide range of students that are going to be on in your classroom, making up your classroom community. And so I think the first part is just like, what is your reaction going to be? If you look at the list and you just start complaining about how hard it is, and you just don't fully accept each of those students for who they are individually, then that is going to trickle into not only your classroom, but also how you are going to do the action pieces, which it does require a little bit more, whether it's communicating with families or doing differentiated practices with students. And so I often would say for some of the people who just genuinely didn't want to be there, or just honestly didn't like that population of students, then it could really make or break the school as a whole. And so it's just been a community that I've thrived in, and I've seen both spectrums where you can be centered around people who are actively trying to make the difference, or the people who don't want to do those extra steps. And so just making sure that you're being on the positive reactive side, that is going to be a catalyst for change and a domino effect, just to allow other people to follow your lead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That is discouraging when you do have a few team members who are not on board, but I do think at the individual level, you can, be there.
Absolutely.
So tell us more about, as school counselors, my audience is primarily school counselors or just educators in general, working with these populations. I want to ask about how we can best support students themselves. Like if you have a few strategies that you've found helpful, and then their families. So parents, caregivers, more specifically.
Yes. So starting with students, there are definitely some ways that school counselors can be able to support. And I often say that any person who is a part of a student's care plan or educational plan, whether it's the teacher, the counselor, the specials teachers, the administration, if they have other special support services, they all work together as a whole, as one team. And so although it's just like, the counseling realm, I think there are definitely some things that can be done to support those students when they get back into their environments, which are the classroom, and then their environment, which is at home. So one of the things that you can incorporate within your lessons or the sessions and times you have are embedding any types of scaffolds or supports, because some of those students might lack some of the basic language. They might lack some of the confidence or the motivation to want to even learn. And so if you're asking them to explain something, or if you're asking them to write something or to share about something, you have to kind of go back to the very beginning and realize they might not even have the language to understand what to feel or how to express that. And so being able to use the scaffolds, or giving them the sentence stems, giving them visual supports like pictures, there's nothing that you really can do for these students that would be inappropriate or just not effective. And so that's one thing that you could do is just think about the supports and the scaffolds that you can give, because those are going to also be given to them in the regular classrooms. And then daily check-ins. I think from the counselors that I do know, and I wanted to share this too, a little fun fact. Well, it's not even really a fun fact. It's actually a sad fact. But I was in 2 elementary schools in Texas, both of which did not have school counselors. And so this is just, big and major, just the fact that you all are in schools and supporting students, because there are several schools where it is not mandatory for those schools to have counselors because it comes out of their budget. And if the administration decides that that's not how they want to allocate their funds, then those schools do not get counselors. And so I just really support you for what you do. But daily check-ins. And I think this is really important to gauge the moods, because as we know, different students come to school with different temperaments, or they might have something that happened that very morning, or you don't even know how they're getting to school, what happened in the evening, if they ate food or not. And so I think just making sure that you are prioritizing that daily check-in and letting them know that their moods matter, their emotions matter, what they're going through matters. That's going to be one level to kind of breaking maybe that tough exterior that some of these students might come to you with. And it's going to allow you to truly get to know them, their environment, their situation. And at times of crisis or times where they really need to open up, it's going to make those doors a lot more accessible when they know like who they can be able to come to.
I love that. Yes. I think,
yeah.
Because as a classroom teacher, you're seeing the students daily, but for counselors, you might have to make a little more of an effort for this part, but I think it's so important. So I would recommend doing, if you have like a duty time, so if you have to be on like lunch duty, recess duty, car rider line, bus drop off, whatever, make that a time where you could kind of check in with kids, like use the times that you already have instead of thinking of, oh, I have to add this to my to-do list now. I need to check in with all these kiddos. Like, no, just try to make, the moments that you already have scheduled in, even like mandatory, almost undesirable tasks. Like, I know I kind of hated having duty sometimes, but just using it in a positive way to check in with kids, like those few students, just like asking them how they're doing. And like you said, just remembering that a lot of these kids don't even have their basic needs met. So we always have to go back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we need to make sure that their basic needs are being met, or how can we support them on that level before we have higher expectations of them.
Yes, and I was going to say too, I've been doing a unique thing this season, which is substituting, and I actually got to substitute for a teacher who worked with special ed, but also some of the students are characterized as being low income. And on her lesson plan, before the day even got started, she has certain classrooms and she has the student's name to go in and check in. And she had, for one child, it was a behavior, like kind of like a behavior sheet. It's not a behavior sheet, but it's more of like a checklist that they can be able to move through their day. Mm-hmm. And the other one, it was like a certain phrase that she used that really built that student up. And so when thinking about individualizing, that was like the perfect thing that I saw, because I had to go and visit 3 students in 3 different classrooms, and I had to do 3 different things to be able to empower those students. And when I walked in, of course, I wasn't their teacher, but the fact that they still did not lack that way that they started their day was incredible. And when I did the afternoon check-in, it was almost like I was their teacher, because that routine was sustained for them. So you definitely can't overlook that action of just doing a basic, quick 15 to 20 second check-in.
Yes, that's amazing. I love that she individualized it to each student, because different things.
It was incredible.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yes. And so a couple of other things thinking about the student support is thinking about some of these students might have language barriers. And so thinking about ways that you can address that. You still have to, pull these students, or you want to see these students. And so whether that is thinking about, incorporating resources that have that student's native language so that they can be able to still be a part of it, thinking about using something. I mean, I know that sometimes Google Translate or Duolingo is not all the way accurate, but it's better than nothing. And so being able to think about, how can I still make a connection with a student, even if they have a different language, is really, really key. And just also allowing them and their families to feel protected. And similar to what you had kind of like piggybacked on, which is like, we don't know what these students are going through. I think, three words here: assuming good intention with these students always. There are so many factors that come into play. And so I always try to keep in my mind, I have to be this child's advocate. And so I know that you all advocate so much for counseling and these sessions and the minutes that your students have to get. And so with just thinking about assuming good intention, these students are products at this time of their environment, but it's not going to always stay that way, because you can be able to make that difference within them. But other simple things that you could do that could transfer not only in your space, but then help them in their classrooms and then help them at home, are by making checklists for structures. I think that so often, teachers do get overwhelmed with trying to look at every child individual, and it's just how it kind of happens. But if you could think about, okay, maybe this child needs checklists, and you could be able to create that with that student, check on them with that student, and then provide them with that for the classroom and at home, communicating that with the teacher and at home. That is just such a great connection piece that you could be able to instill with them. And then small things like offering flexibility. If you know that a student, maybe relinquishing the control that we sometimes have, like let them sit somewhere where it's enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you play something play music that they want to hear, give them some choices so that it's a little bit more calming and special for them to be able to have that moment and that space that's there. And then the last thing that we've already talked about is providing that differentiated instruction, and kind of like that, the teacher that I mentioned that I got to substitute for, that's a perfect way just to think about individualizing anything you're doing that's specific to those unique student needs.
Oh, I love that. These are such good strategies, and they're not overwhelming. Like, I feel like counselors can start implementing these right away. And I love that we talked about the targeted piece of it earlier too, because even if a counselor's listening and they're like, oh, I don't work at a Title I school, school wide, there are still those individual students I'm sure that they're thinking of now that could benefit from these little things.
Yes.
Amazing. Okay. So those are great student strategies. What about families and caregivers?
Okay. So I was trying to, obviously everything again is interconnected. And so if you can support them by the student, the best way outside of school is to get to those families and let this be one big like environmental shift and change in a positive way for these students. So one thing is going to be to figure out the best method of communication. And so I know that a lot of the time at the schools that I have been in where they might have a guidance counselor, I know the teachers were still the main ones making communications. And so if you personally make communications with these parents, or if you don't, I would encourage you to find the best method and meet them where they are. So I think a lot of the time we're in this space, especially after the pandemic, where teachers in general are like, protect your peace, protect your space, you give what you can give and don't work after contract hours. And while I think that that is a healthy boundary, when you are working with students who are in these environments of being in low income, you almost have to be very flexible and be accommodating. And so figuring out the best methods of communication and just meeting those parents where they are is going to be key in just being able to have that open line and dialogue. And then also, if you are sending home something or talking to a parent, making sure that you're thinking about family-friendly language and family-friendly wording, because honestly, some of these students that you're working with and that you're seeing in your sessions are first generation students. And so their parents might not have the background or the educational, verbiage or whatever that is that you're speaking about. So keeping it almost like you're talking to your student is how you can be able to talk to those parents until they're ready for more. And then again, addressing the language barriers. If there is a certain language that they are speaking, don't let that be a reason that you can't communicate with them. You can try to seek out someone in their family. I know that I've had conversations and conferences with as personal as the oldest sibling in that family. And typically those siblings are used to it because if they're paying bills, if they are going to the grocery store, they are the ones communicating in English with the cashier or with the bill collector. And so you definitely don't want to put the pressure on that, the oldest sibling, but they are kind of assuming the role and it is helping them too. So thinking about a family member, an aunt, an uncle, thinking about someone in your school. I know that I worked at an IB school. We had a Vietnamese person on staff. And so I had a student that was low income and Vietnamese. It does take some scheduling, but I would have them make phone calls for me. I would have them come in and do parent conferences with me. And then also, using the translator app too. Mm-hmm. I can pause if you have anything to say, but I have a couple more and then.
Yeah, okay. This is so great.
Just in case. I know I can go on and on. I'm so passionate about.
No, I love it. A few things before I'm like, I should be writing down my follow-up questions. No, I love it. I love that you were saying time-wise, like, because I'm big on boundaries too, on the contract hour things. We preach that over here for sure. But that is so true that it is a case-by-case basis. And you do need to think about, like, what if the parent's working 2 jobs and they literally are not available during your contract hours? And a lot of times teachers, especially now since the pandemic, which is where I thought you were going to go when you said that, is just the assumption that people have access to technology or that everyone has email or, those things. So you may do more of like an old school way to reach out to them. Because I know now even a lot of teachers have like that. What is the app? Class Dojo.
Like Class Dojo
Class
or
Dojo.
Remind. Yeah.
Something like that where they're communicating with families. But that might not always be accessible for all the parents. So we need to remember that. And then I was just nodding my head yes when you're talking about using older siblings as translators. That's an option. But definitely not being like, oh, I'm just not going to communicate because it seems too hard. Getting creative, trying to find ways. When I was interning, I remember the counselor I was working with, this was at a Title I school, and she was always like taking notes on her computer, and we always had our computers out in her office. But then this one mother came in and it was just like really tough situation. They're like living in and out of a hotel, all these things. And she like put her computer away, got out a clipboard and just like one pencil and just made it like super simple. And just, I don't know, her whole like demeanor changed. And I've also sat in meetings when it'll be like 5 staff members and then a parent come in and we all have our laptops out and are like talking about different things right before they come in. And it's just kind of intimidating, especially with education. There's so many acronyms and our little lingo that we get so used to that can be so overwhelming for a parent. So I just love those reminders about family friendly language. And that counselor that I was interning for, she even said like, with this parent in particular, I thought that she would be more open to share if I just like made it really simple and just had like a clipboard out asking how I could support their family instead of having my computer out and everything. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like a simple change.
Yeah.
It's little changes like that can mean the world of difference and they go a long way for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Something else, and I just have a few more and then we can, let that marinate. But just like thinking about the students that you might be servicing, if you are giving them certain scaffolds and certain supports, just knowing that you can give those same things to the parents at home. And so this is kind of going back to like my classroom teaching days, but you can definitely use this for the way that you are planning out and implementing your sessions. But thinking about, if my students got it, then the parents at home could get it to be able to support them. And this digital era, we don't always have the technology piece, but this digital era allowed it to go home when the kids were at home. So the whole thing thinking about how can you get things home. And so I loved always when it came to reading, let's say, or if you have a certain scenario and you want students to be able to follow up with whatever those scenarios or whatever those topics are that you're doing, giving those questions to the parents to be able to ask, not just saying, have a discussion about this. So sometimes if you can just give them, ask this question first, ask this question second, ask this question third, that is almost what the parents need to be able to implement it, because a lot of the time they want to help, they want to support, they just don't know where to start. They don't know how, they're not sure how to make that connection. So giving them as much as you can give them will also strengthen that relationship with their child, which I think is just really incredible. And then sending home, like if you want them to work on some type of project, a feelings project. Well, if you're in a Title I school, you have funding to all of the materials. That is one thing. A lot of the kids don't have to bring, crayon and glue and construction paper. We get access to all of those things from federal funding. So you could even send home the project materials. That way the parents don't feel like they have to go out and purchase it, but they can still be able to get that project completed, or they can make that feelings poster or whatever it is that you're wanting them to do. And so there's little ways like that that you can be able to support the families. If there are certain charts or certain visuals that you want the students that you work with to remember, or if you have a little chant that you want them to say whenever they're feeling angry, you can make those into mini charts. I love mini anchor charts mainly because you can put them into notebooks, you can put them into folders. It takes very minimal paper, and they can actually go home and come back to school, or they can just be sent home because it's such little paper. So thinking about how you can send home mini anchor charts or reference sheets or anything that's going to help with the processes you're teaching and help that to be transferred at home. And the only last two things that I wanted to touch on was, one, this happened with the story of one of my students who was not only low income, but ended up having to go homebound because she had cancer. And this was prior to the pandemic. But what I had to do with her was I was like, I don't want her to lose out on this information. The parents were very hands-on, but they just didn't know the language, and they would do anything to help her. And so I started recording very, very quick lessons because the students could be able to hear them. And so that's something where when the pandemic rolled around, I was like, oh man, well, this isn't my first rodeo. I've had to do this before. But you could definitely record quick little lessons that could be accessed at home if those parents do have technology, or you could send home communications that way by showing them who you are and making that connection. And similar to hosting a parent night, those don't always work because sometimes parents are working third shift, or they're working first shift, or they're working multiple shifts. And so if they do have technology, that's a great way where you can be able to have Zoom or in-person types of conferences or touch points. But more so, you could just record yourself and try to send those out. Even with a short little click, it can go to someone's text message. And so you just have to kind of accommodate according to work schedules, and just be understanding of those families, and just ultimately remembering the child is kind of what does it for me in terms of being able to accommodate at a very healthy pace and rate.
Yes. Oh, I love this. And just your passion just always shines through. You're so much fun to talk about. And those are great, great ideas. Well, thank you so much, Megan. This episode's been awesome. Like I said, it just had me thinking, and I know the counselors are probably thinking and feeling inspired on how they can do little things to help support these students and families. Because I think that's what it's all about. We don't want to overburden, the educators, but rather empower them. You're already doing so many awesome things. If you can just little tweaks here and there can go a long way.
Yes, that's what it's all about. Yes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Where can everybody find you if they want to connect with you?
You're so welcome. And thank you again just for allowing me to come on here and chat with you. I just always enjoy communicating and chatting with you. But if you are just wanting to connect with me or have any questions about anything concerning Title I, again, I'm not a super expert, but whatever, I have worked, 15 years in Title I schools. So if you have any questions about that, or just literacy or ways to support teachers around you, you can find me on Instagram at The Literacy Dive. I'm also at The Literacy Dive on all other platforms, TikTok, Teachers Pay Teachers. And then if you are looking for specific, maybe you're looking for bringing literacy into your counseling sessions, I do have a podcast, The Literacy Dive Podcast, and you can be able to just browse through and see if there's a topic that can support you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so, so much. We'll talk soon, I hope.
Sounds good. Yes, we sure will.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.